Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which LIANG-KAI YU will defend the academic thesis Curating Otherwise Queer Intersectional Practices in Contemporary Art Institutions. Please, the floor is to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, members of committee, dear friends, family, Papa, Mama, 你们好, both here in the room and watching online in the Netherlands or in Taiwan or elsewhere. Thank you for joining me on this special day. Before the formal part of my defense, I would like to take a few minutes to introduce my research. At the Tate Britain in 2017, Travis Alabanza performed the piece Left Outside Alone in response to the museum's Queer British Art exhibitions. Dressed in pink Bible gown, holding up a bouquet, and walking into the gallery to the sound of the bridal chorus. They stood surrounded by the exhibition brochures and an anticipating crowd. A voiceover echoes through the space, and I quote, white walls, white people. I see these words as a reminder we are never gonna to be let in, end quote. Then the pop song anthem Left Outside Alone began to play. For some in the audience, it's a queer classic. For others, completely out of place. What is this song? Alabanza's lip syncs, pointing to the glossy brochures, and mocked the £16 ticket price. £16, I'm gonna be left outside. The performance was defiant, emotional, disruptive, but it wasn't part of the main exhibition. It happened as a side event, organized by Tate staff outside of the curatorial team. That moment captured the central tension of my dissertation. What happens when queer and trans voices are invited in, but only on limited terms in contemporary art institutions? My research explored how artists, curators, particularly queer and non-binary people of color, challenging these terms through what I call curating otherwise. Practices that resist symbolic inclusion and push institutions to change how they welcome, collaborate, and care. Many museums and art institutions today proudly frame themselves as inclusive. They host LGBTQ+ exhibitions, collaborate with queer artists, signal progressive values. These gestures matter, but they are not a full story. What I found in my research is that inclusion often comes with conditions. Artists, especially queer and trans people of colors, are invited in, but often as temporary guests. They are welcome on the institutional terms, not necessarily their own. And yet, the relationship isn't one-sided. Institutions aren't simply villains, and artists aren't always victims. In fact, what's happening is much more complex. Artists and collectives are reshaping the institution from within, using care-based, collaborative, bottom-up approaches. At the same time, some institutions, like the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, the Netherlands, have tried to rethink how they work by adapting more participatory and collective frameworks. These moments of change are fragile, sometimes full of contradiction, but they offer a glimpse of what's possible. My research contributes to queer art history, museum studies, and curatorial studies. It explores how inclusion of queer and trans artists of color can both reveal and reshape institutional practices, like exhibition design, catalogs, programming, and curatorial organization. Building on this, my work explored the entangled relationship between artists, institutions, not just how invitations are made, but how power, values, and the terms of curatorial collaborations are negotiated. So how do we move beyond inclusion as just more than visibility or representation? What does it look like when institutions and communities reimagine the very frameworks that define how art is shown, shared, and experienced? These are the core questions I explore in my research. My dissertation looked at how queer and trans artists, curators, and collectives reshape the way exhibitions are created, and how museums welcome people in. I focus on what I call queer intersectional curatorial practices. That might sound technical, but what it means is simply this: ways of curating that center life experiences, challenging dominant norms, and work through emotion and embodiment. I approach these questions by studying both past and present exhibitions. For older exhibitions, like those from the 1990s, I couldn't visit them in person. So I reconstruct them using what I call ephemeral archives, things like catalogs, installation photos, reviews, recompiled publications of queer activist art. These overlooked traces help me to understand how queerness was curated, even when official records left things out. For more recent case studies, I conducted ethnographic research, meaning I observe exhibitions as they happen, interview artists and curators, and pay attention to how space felt and functioned. I spent a year embedded at the Farnabe Museum and visit Documenta 15 in Kassel, Germany. I wanted to know, how do these institutions experiment with more inclusive, sensory, and collaborative ways of curating? How do they work with queer and trans artists? What happens when grassroots collectives work with or inside larger institutions? Rather than treating institutions as either oppressive or liberating, I focus on the entangled relationship between artists, curator, and institutions. Sometimes these partnerships are full of tension, but sometimes they open up new opportunities. This mix of archival works and embodied fieldworks allow me to study curation not just as an institutional job, but as something emotional, relational, and deeply political. To answer the questions I raised in my research, I developed a framework to understand this kind of practice that I call Curating Otherwise. Curating Otherwise means rethinking how we design exhibitions, not just by adding more queer or trans artists to the program, but by challenging the deeper structures of power that shape how our institutions work. It asks us not to look at who is included, but how, on whose terms, and what gets left out. I begin my research by analyzing the catalogs and printing materials of two landmark queer exhibitions from the 90s, in a different light and dismantling invisibility. This archival material weren't just records of past exhibitions. They were active sites of curatorial decision-making. By looking closely at the layout choice, editorial change, even act of visual censorship, I discover how queerness, especially when shaped by race and marginality, is negotiate not just what is displayed, but how it's framed. This attention to what I call minor details reveal how curators and editors can subtly resist or reproduce dominant narratives, even on printing pages. I then look at more recent exhibitions like Art Aids America and Queer British Art, where the artists such as Kia Labesha, whose photography you see here, and Travis Alavanza, whose performance I just cited, express grief, frustration, and alienation. This emotional response weren't just personal, they were political. They reveal how exclusion often comes with limits. To understand how institutions are trying to change or being shaken up, I moved to more embodied practice at the Van Abbe Museum. There, I observed how curators develop multisensory, accessible exhibitions that use sound, touch, and emotion, not just sight, to create more horizontal space for queer, disabled, and racialized visitors. I also examined Rangupa's approach called Lumbun at Documenta 15, which was based on sharing resource and bottom-up organization. I argue that their model follows what I call strategic hospitality, that offers new ways of working across difference, but also reveal how institutions struggle when their power is truly challenged. This case study shows that change doesn't come from representation alone. It comes from rethinking how institutions invite, collaborate, and share power. That's what Curating Otherwise is about. Not just being seen in the vitrine, but reshaping the conditions of visibility itself. So why does it matter? Why curating otherwise? Because inclusion alone can be misleading. Museums may invite queer and trans artists in, but often on limited terms, without changing the systems that determine who gets visibility, whose stories are told, and under what conditions. My research shows that curating otherwise is not just about being seen. It's about changing how institutions welcome, collaborate, and care. It's not a diversity add-on. It's a way of working that centers interdependence, accountability, and the embodied experience of those most excluded. This practice don't always feel comfortable. They involve refusal, tension, vulnerability. But that's where real change begins. Curating Otherwise asks, what if we stop trying to fit into the frame and instead reimagine the frame itself? In the end, this work is not about rejecting institutions. It's about insisting that they do better. It's about turning the vitrine around, not just to be visible, but to expose the structures behind the glass, to ask together, what could we build instead? Thank you for your listening, and I give my word to Projekte.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The opposition will be opened by Professor Peters, who has a chair, who is endowed Professor of Innovation and Classical Music at the Department of Philosophy and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Maastricht University. The floor is to you.
Dear candidates, dear LIANG-KAI, I would like to start with congratulating you with your thesis. I think it's highly original and also very well written. You convincingly argue for reimagining practices of curating in museums and contemporary art institutions to provide space for what you call curating otherwise. And my question is about your methodological approach, and more specifically, I was impressed by your own hands-on experience in curating otherwise that you describe in the impact paragraph. So that is what I will focus on. At the heart of your thesis are these 4 case studies that you just described. And you analyze these as practical examples of how curating otherwise could help to envision institutional transformation beyond traditional hierarchies of power. And to analyze these case studies, you use archival analysis for the first two, because these are historical. And for the third and the fourth case, you relied on embodied ethnographic observation as well as autoethnography. And you explain the need for this mixed methodology or mixed methods approach by referring to Halberstam's concept of, and I quote, a scavenger methodology. This scavenger or queer methodology allows the researcher to transcend disciplinary boundaries, and I can see how this is important given the program that underlies your PhD research, which is exploring how marginalized subjects can be studied beyond disciplinary boundaries. And when reading your impact paragraph, and more specifically the part on your work at Limestone Books here in Maastricht, I wondered if you defined your already inclusive methodological repertoire maybe even a bit too narrow. Because I can imagine that the practical work that you did in this grassroots space, it's an art publishing space, has learned you a lot about the opportunities and difficulties of creating connections between spaces like Limestone and the institutional spaces you seek to transform. So my question is if and how your work at Limestone Books and your other curating work as a form of practice-based research could be seen as an integral part of your scavenger methodology.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for this important question, and even allow me to reflect what I'm usually trying to do outside the PhD, which I don't always see the deeper connection between them. But the one of the reason I will adopt this scavenger approach, indeed, as you notice, is very much rooted in my own curatorial experience, either in Taiwan or in Netherlands, where when we are also thinking along with most queer historians, queer researchers like Jose Munoz, when they are tracing the queer past in the institutional space, it's often difficult because the system is built not to include them, and rather we often find traces in the details, accidental documents or archive. So that is the main reason for this scavenger approach. But now I find your question very interesting, like whether so the Limestone Books it's a collective platforms initiated by Chen Zhen, Emily, Xie Yishen, and Fabricia and me. One of our goal was to bring in voices that you cannot find in the Dutch art publishing scene, and it's there's certainly a lot of like practical experience and knowledge to be made. But I also see the challenges when you are a practitioner working in the cultural organizations. You find it very difficult to have a moment of reflections and with you just try to survive basically, to secure fundings, to pay the artists you try to work with. So I guess what I try to say is like I think it would be very ideal if we can push ourselves to be a more like a practice-based research center. But at the same time, I also see the reality of either you are working in larger institution or in a grassroots organization. Yeah, I wonder if this sufficiently answer your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, but I think it's really interesting to see how you can sort of learn from this grassroots experience if you want to transform these larger institutions and how to make these connections. But I think that's something to discuss also later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to move on with the defense, and we are addressing now the members who are present online. So I would like to give the floor now to Professor De Cesari, who has a chair in Heritage, Memory and Culture Studies at the University of Amsterdam. The floor is to you, Professor Cesari.
Dear candidate, I must say that I really enjoyed reading your dissertation, and it was a pleasure, which I always appreciate. And of course, the topics that you discuss are very close to my heart and my work, but I think you, as the opponent before me emphasized, you have written a really very strong dissertation. And what I particularly appreciated about your thesis is the ways in which you managed to track and detail the larger process of institutionalization of various kinds of inclusion strategies, particularly in the last 10 years, and the ways in which you rightly emphasize and show and demonstrate the kind of the ambivalence of the institutionalization of this variegated institutionalization of this inclusion strategies by different kinds of cultural institutions trying to reform themselves, kind of to save themselves. And I also very much like this sort of tension between that you managed to capture in a very convincing way, this tension between, you know, symbolic, sometimes very tokenistic inclusion of formerly marginalized voices in the space, the institutional space of the museums, and sort of more transformative interventions. My questions to you now, the first is a more theoretical one that has to do with the ways in which your project contributes to the long-standing debate about the reform versus the abolition of institutions, which of course extends well beyond the field of museums and curation, but which has recently, like in the last 5 years, been talked about in public space in the Netherlands, particularly in relation to the question of museums. What do we do with museums? If inclusion is possible, or if transformation is possible only in the form of symbolic tokenistic inclusion, then maybe we should dismantle this institution. So there has been a return to those debates around reform versus abolitions of particularly cultural institutions. I was wondering, given that your project clearly and in so many ways concerns with these fundamental questions of what to do with failing institutions, what did you learn about this particular topic throughout the years of your research? And my question in particular concerns the fact that very often the reform versus the abolition of institutions, I think it's too much talked about in terms of two radically different alternatives, as if you have just symbolic sort of inclusion or the destruction of an institutions, which sometimes it feels like people really imagine as an actual sort of demolishing of the museums, and whether sort of how do you picture the relationship between abolition and reform after these years, and what are your thoughts on that?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for these critical questions, and allow me to further elaborate the possible theoretical contributions. I hope I can venture to try to use the case studies of Documenta 15, which I did in chapter 4, which I think it nicely responded to this tension between whether to reform the institutions or totally abolish it. And I very much agree what you said, very much like disruption, disturb, as shown in this image, would be things as like destroying the institutions or trying to abolish it. But what I observed in the Documenta directed by Rangupa and many other collectives, there's like 1,500 artists involved, is that I don't think their intention is to totally abolish the institution, but rather they are trying to reoccupy it, and for example, party office, they occupy the existing dungeon bar space, and then to rebuild it, that is inclusively for trans of color people. And I call this kind of approach strategic hospitalities, drawing on Jaco Derrida's notion of hospitalities, because I think Derrida's ideas capture these tensions, and not in the problematic ways, not like but rather I try to argue like, is it the strategic use of how they welcome the host back, which the host here is the Documenta itself, to rethink how they receive artists traditionally, because traditionally they focus on having the artwork at the Documenta for the 100 days, but artists only go to the opening. But in this case, in this Documenta, they have all the artists living there for more than 100 days, and which also cause challenge, especially if you think about visa problems. But I argue that it's actually the moment for the institution to rethink how they usually include or invite artists, and how can they change that. So I see the moment of disruption as like a learning opportunity, and this is done through their strategic use of hospitality. Yeah. Have I sufficiently answered your question?
Can I ask another follow-up question? I mean, the example that, in a way, but the example that you make, if one wants to sort of push the argument a little bit to the limit, then the example of Documenta 15 shows that actually mainstream state institutions are not to be reformed, because in fact, one could argue that Documenta GmbH didn't learn anything from the experience of Ruangrupa. I mean, the artists were actively, the institutions of Documenta didn't protect the artist and the curatorial committee against the defamation campaign that was carried out by including, politicians of the German states. Even the Minister of Culture at one point went against Ruangrupa. And actually, it finished beforehand because the artist quit. So in a way, that kind of example would show, I would say, that you cannot transform institutions, because if you really want to do serious transformation, then either the institution explodes from within or the artists are expelled.
Yeah. Thank you for this important remark, and I totally agree. In terms of Documenta institution itself, it just shows that it has this very strong resistance to change, and also radicalize itself even more further. And I agree. It's not the optimistic outlook for Documenta itself, but I would say for Lumpen itself, for the artist collective and its networks, I think it's influenced not just the Documenta itself as an institutions. There's, I think, like the Apples and all other grassroots institutions worldwide. They all they see the mistake. And they can learn from it. So in this case, I'm not perhaps I'm not suggesting like, okay, Ruangrupa can this approach will totally transform that single institution, but what I see is like as a example, even there's certain like a failure in it. I see this learning opportunity for the wider the RE, artist and cultural ecology. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Richard Sandel, who has a chair in museum studies at the University of Leicester. Floor is to you, Professor Sandel.
And congratulations, candidate. It's a really impressive thesis, and it's one that addresses such a timely topic. It's a topic that we're really deeply interested in, that we're kind of actively engaging with here in the UK and in the research centre that I'm part of. And I think you interrogate this really highly dynamic field of practice in ways that generates original insights and ones that are really instructive for us trying to work in that space. You demonstrate a really sophisticated and nuanced grasp of the field, and I think what comes out so strongly is that you're not simply researching this topic, but as you shared in your introductory remarks, you are immersed in the field of practice that you are investigating, and it brings such a kind of nuance to your analysis. I'm particularly interested in the implications of your research for institutions and for curators that are seeking to navigate, the sort of tensions and pitfalls that your work highlights. So in our research centre at Leicester, it's such a curious and unexpected time to be working around queer and LGBTQ plus heritage and art, we see, on the one hand, greater interest than ever before. We have more and more institutions seeking to collaborate with queer communities, to insert queer content into those frames that you've identified. But we also find ourselves at a time when that work is more than ever part of a challenging, hostile social and political context. So, you know, since Trump's election and the dismantling of equality and diversity and inclusion initiatives, we're finding the organisations that we work with are more cautious, more uncertain. Some of the work we would have done in quite a straightforward way, even quite recently, is now subject to increased scrutiny by the organisation. It goes further up the leadership organisation to seek approval to go ahead. We have some organisations withdrawing from our projects, again, sometimes at quite short notice. So this very interesting contradiction between increasing openness and interest and increasing challenges. And I wondered if you had any reflections, what your research can tell us about how cultural institutions and how curators within them can move forward in this very difficult, hostile social and political context. Do you have any thoughts you could share on that?
Yeah. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for this very urgent questions. I believe a lot of us in this room are also facing now. Yes, so I feel like when I started this project in the Netherlands, I think there was this height of an interest in queering the museum, networks, and practice, and then saying out loud, and then indeed, as you said, in the recent year, especially now there's this like there's this like a rising hostility, either anti-trans or queerphobic response, and so throughout my chapters, I was trying to look at what are the ways to move beyond the more like very symbolic or sometimes the tokenist inclusion, which sometimes is good for the first step, but now, especially now, we see their limits. So I feel like so that's why I theorize curating otherwise, to thinking about to thinking with how artists, curators, they don't so much shout it only like, oh, we are queer, we are here, but they use, for example, certain affects, feelings, multi-sensory approach to put the audience and the visitors willing the experience, and this is what I am trying to looking for in the dissertation, like how what are the more effective or more interrelational approach rather than creating the antagonism. Yeah. So at this moment, I don't approve like a self censorship, but I would encourage that we could also try like different approach. Just create certain gatherings or hospitality practice where queerness and non-binary bodies can sneak in and also strive. Yeah.
I really like that because you have a certain pragmatism to your thinking. So you have a really strident call for curating otherwise, for going beyond performative forms of inclusion. But you also, maybe especially in this current context that we're in, can see value in the steps that you might have to take to get there, the kinds of not so much compromise, but negotiation you need to be part of in order to at least make some steps forward at a time when there is so much antagonism, and when sort of the possibility of a rollback is so real and live and already happening around us. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So the opposition will be continued by Dr. Emilie Sitzia, Associate Professor of Culture Education at the Department of History, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Maastricht University. The floor is to you.
Thank you. Dear candidate, first I want to, sorry about that. I want to thank you for an original, compelling and urgent thesis that really contributes both to the theoretical academic knowledge, but also to practical curatorial knowledge. And I really appreciate this kind of double aspect of your thesis, because I really think it potentially can shift the perspective on inclusion of cultural institutions and encourage them to actually rethink their current strategies, which really are mostly related to partial representation at this point. So I would like to build a little bit on Professor Cesari's question and go over the idea of abolition of institution. I would like to ask you about working inside or outside the institution. So basically my question is the institution needed? Would it be more useful to develop practices outside existing museum structures? And what risk would you see in such an approach? Because as you say, they're invited on limited invited in on limited terms. So what if we refuse those invitation on limited terms and think of a practice outside of the institution? What would be lost? What would be gained?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your important question that allow me to think further about this dynamic between insider and outsider. I don't think it's possible. I would encourage to create different kinds of institutions, but I don't think that necessarily means we will automatically be free from the whole art industries, art institutional practice, because they are also interrelated, as I even observe at the Van Abbe museums. Most of their queering practice, or even the most interesting ones, they were conducted by external collaborators, and and so I guess one of the of a reason I trying to think outside of this binary positions is to thinking about the interdependency between how museum actually rely on these collaborators and guests to constantly renew it, but at the same time, although, as I also discussed in the chapters, there's a risk that this can be a very temporary gestures. You just have a queer artist for here for a week, for a month, and then the rest of the year the museum is straight. But I also see that perhaps with each invitations, there's a chance to renegotiate the terms we get, and there are opportunities to do it better. Yeah, I wonder if you would like me to elaborate in some different direction or example.
No, this is fine for me. This is a very good answer, I think.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Weilenmann, who has a postdoctoral fellow in artistic participation in queer and trans archives and collections in Europe at the Department of Literature and Art at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Maastricht University. The floor is to you, Dr. Weilenmann. I think we will see you when you start speaking.
Yeah, I am speaking. Yeah, dear candidate, thanks so much for this piece of work. I think, as has been mentioned before, I think it's very lucidly written, and I enjoy the use of your situatedness and how it made a much more engaging read, I thought. Content-wise, I appreciated the candidate's approach of tackling the theme of queer curatorial strategies via a very broad scope of materials and perspectives, such as exhibition catalogs, documenta surveys, museums, community outreach programs. For instance, proposing to reflect on curatorial ephemera, such as catalogs, as archives, and how they resist normative forms of representations, widens, from my perspective, the more traditional approaches in art studies, and also asks us to reflect more on the role of different agents, such as graphic designers. My question for the candidate is about the genealogies and reference points for the artistic and artistic curatorial strategies illuminated in the texts, in particular in chapters 3 and 4. So for instance, while you approach a documenta exhibition via previous editions of the format, making the argument how Rangrupa's intervention also actively comments on the history of exhibitions there, I was wondering if a similar method would be productive for the artistic examples. So in your text, you do this in a few instances, such as with the reference to Andrea Fraser, this key exponent of institutional criticism in the 80s. And my sense is that the artists you mention in the thesis are not agents emerging from the void, but build on and expand strategies of previous artistic generations. In terms of challenging institutions from a queer of color perspective, I had to think of artists of the 90s, such as Coco Fusco, Isaac Julian, or Theasta Gates. I was also thinking of the earlier discourses surrounding subverting museum exhibitions and their ideas of neutrality within conceptualist discourses, such as Hans Hake and the really active field of feminist approaches of the time. So my question to you is, how would you situate your case studies of artistic curatorial disruptions within a broader history of art and curation? What kind of breaks or continuities do you perceive?
Esteemed opponent, thank you so much for this very important questions, which I, during the writing of my dissertation, I've tried to connect, and indeed, I will position the queer and trans artistic or either curatorial interventions in the institutional space, indeed within the traditions of institutional critique, as Andrea Fraser and Hans Haag you mentioned, or Phil Wilson, which also inspired me a lot. But at the same time, I also think there was also the critical and new museologies happening at the same time. And I do think they actually have more relationship with each others, but which in my dissertations I do have the space to further explore it because if we also think about Fred Wilson also was working in the museum, and how do artists also, because most of artists they are not full-time artists, they are also wearing different hats and in the different positions. So I think it would be, I wonder if to more significantly address your question, whether that will allow to more exploration between the how not just artists, curator, but generally all kinds of art workers, how their practice and knowledge influence one another. But indeed, I'm very much rely on the Euro-American traditions of institutional critiques and how these artists intervene in this museum space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We still have time for a second round, so I would like to pass the floor again to Professor De Cesari. You can ask a second question.
Dear candidates, I would like to continue talking about your views and your understanding of what real structural transformations in the museum might look like beyond representations and just temporary interventions, incursions in the space of the museums, and temporary disruptions of that space and logics, which is a topic that, of course, has been touched upon in several questions and answers that have preceded this moment. Do you think those practices have the potential, concretely, the practices that you have described, do you think they have the potential to change the museum space and art spaces into something new? And do you think they can also have a broader impact beyond museums and cultural institutions as spaces of representation? So do you think the change that is perhaps taking place, the structural change that is perhaps taking place in the museum, does it have the potential to change something outside, beyond representation and discourse?
highly esteemed opponent. Thank you so much for this stimulating question. I think I do think I think I'm not in my research, or what I learned is that I'm not looking for a completely refreshment of the institutions. Even that is I guess that is also like impossible, or maybe not so much practical. Consider how we also institution also rely on certain norms to sustain. But what I'm trying to examine and argue is like this kind of small practice, like the small details in the exhibition catalogs, or using like emotions. At least in the examples I examined at RA's America, it's the activists and artists, they effectively enact change through emotion, and perhaps it's not necessary a single museum that change, but even better because it's a traveling exhibition, so it goes through a different editions, and every editions it adapt to a little bit of the local context, and adding more black artists in that exhibitions. And your second question is more about whether such practice can have a broader implication beyond the culture institutions, right? I think there certainly is perhaps not entirely covered. Okay, so at this, like in the case I examined in a different light, the curator specifically acknowledged that a lot of their artistic approach is not inspired from the art institution or the art history, but from the street. It's from the AIDS activism that was happening in the 90s. So I certainly think there's a lot of like interlink between this kind of queer intervention in institutional space, and also if we look at another example, if we look at the documenta, there's a lot of they don't just use the museum as their exhibition space. They also use churches. They also use passenger work, and that for me also this kind of artistic practice offsite of the institutions potentially can have a wider social engagement.
Thank you. Then we will continue our second round, and I would like to give the floor again to Professor Sandel for a second question.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm interested in following on from all these discussions, who museums collaborate with from queer communities. So, you know, sometimes, of course, those first steps that you spoke of earlier, when perhaps a museum for the first time reaches out or works in partnership with a community group, it is often driven by a request for visibility. We want to be included, we want to be represented. But the deeper transformation that you make such a compelling case for, in my experience at least, only really happens when museums collaborate with highly politicized communities that are demanding more sort of substantive changes. So across your case studies and your wider curating experience, do you think your Curating Otherwise framework, what does it tell us about who museums should work with if they want to press forward those changes?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you so much for this important question.
Who asked?
You can conclude your answer if you want.
Conclude my answer. I think it's important to think about not only who the museum collaborate with, but also how, as you said, like there's often this desire for visibility. But what is the desire of these communities? What do they want? Have the museum starting to ask them, or the museum only reach out to them out of the institution's own desire? Yeah. So maybe I reshift this question to a bit like whose desire is it?
Thank you.
Thank you. Dear LIANG-KAI YU, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now discuss the quality of your thesis and the defense, and I would like to ask you and your company to leave this room, and after the deliberation the beadle will come and collect you to return to this room again. Thank you. Please.
Anonyms, please.
Audience, please.
Yeah, you did it separate.
Okay, so there was no relation. No. Okay, so that's only in retrospect that you can see that.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Speaking of sneaking things, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's. But it gave him the opportunity to sort of. It's all about.
Exactly. Yeah.
LIANG-KAI YU. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of the positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Steinbock is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with the Dutch university custom. So can I invite you, your supervisor, to now take the floor?
Please, all rise. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times? To be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, LIANG-KAI YU, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with a degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. This is the photo moment.
Yeah.
You ready?
You can approach if you like.
Yes?
Careful with the glass.
Yes.
Please be seated. You can give that to the parent.
Yeah.
Ready for it.
Just close it. It is my great honor to congratulate you. Oh, I'd get emotional. Dr. Yu, on this tremendous achievement of receiving your doctorate today. I also wish to extend the congratulations of your very proud co-supervisors, Dr. Dirk van de Heuvel and Dr. Vivian van Saza. You and I started this PhD trajectory together with Professor Dr. Kitty Zalmans at the Art History Department of Leiden University. At the time, I was working in the same research center as Kitty, and she mentioned to me what a fantastic MA thesis you had written on queering museums, which she had evaluated very highly, I might add. The topic really piqued my interest, and I immediately reached out to you to discuss ideas. It was serendipity. I was putting together a bid for the Cultural Heritage Project with museums and archives exactly on queering, cripping, and decolonizing initiatives within the heritage sector. I am so grateful to Kitty for bringing us together and for the many fruitful years. I was trying to count back. I think it's been 7. So we've had a cycle. In these years, we've worked and played our way together towards this moment. From day one, you have been an integral team member of the NWO-funded Smart Culture Project, The Critical Visitor, and formed a tight bond with your fellow PhD researcher, who's, of course, this amazing assistant right now, Noah Little, who is also, of course, your power nymph, and will soon follow this road to the defense. Let me also mention our co-researcher, lector, and cultural heritage at the Rijnvaart Academy, Hester Dibbets, who, along with Dirk, has made our team of the Fabulous Five such a generative space for learning about and devising intersectional interventions into all kinds of heritage spaces. And you have made an intellectual home here in Maastricht with the other PhDs who formed the POP, which is standing for Progress Over Perfectionism, And it's a wonderful writing accountability group, such as with Peter Duplessis, who is your other dear paranymph. Just beyond our Faculty of the Arts and Social Sciences, and actually just across the road, you have helped to create the art bookstore Limestone Books, a beacon to the critical and creative community of Maastricht. And there's a watch party for this defense organized at Limestone, and I hope you are all there cheering and celebrating right now. I promise we'll be over there soon to toast your dear friend. And since January, you've also started a 10-month residency at the Maastricht hotspot for artists, curators, and artistic researchers, the renowned Jan van Eyck Academy. This is all to say that you might not have started your PhD time in Maastricht, but this has been clearly a fertile ground for you to put down your roots and to blossom as a researcher and critical curator. So thank you too for enriching our intellectual environment. I have loved having your soft laughter be part of our meetings, your sharp questions, and abundant conceptual references, sometimes just raining down on me. And I will greatly miss our time working together in the critical visitor team and in the supervision meetings with Dirk and Vivian, that we're always bursting with new possible directions, concepts, references, and discussions about images. And we're all very proud of how it looks now in this beautiful book. You and I have also co-written an article on the Pacifica Fa'afafine artist, Yuki Kihara, and it was wonderful to be able to see even more close up how you carefully research and formulate your ideas in conversation with these living artists. You've been prolific during your PhD time, writing not only the dissertation, but also a book review, 2 peer-reviewed articles, and 3 versions of the Musing on a Queer Museum, a failure essay that has been widely cited by folks working in the museum world and studies. And I think this means that this book needs to get out there as soon as possible to also be cited and to be used. And you've also managed to find time to co-curate the exhibition, Survival of the Exceptional, in 2021 at the Tian Art Museum in Taiwan, with the queer artist collective Walking Grass and the independent curator Xia Ming Yung. This early foray into the work of a museum professional gave you an opportunity to test and evolve your conceptual framework of curating otherwise. Like many of your side projects, most of which I did not fully know about, because he does have a slightly sneaky side, sneaking into museums, right? They have always enriched the dissertation, your developing skills, and your blossoming networks. Now, this is my first laudation as a promoter, and as such will always stand out in my memory. So thank you for sharing this moment with me. It was a long 5 years, you can understand. And it's sad to come to a close, but we must. So in closing, I wish to congratulate those who have walked this road with you, especially your boyfriend, Nate, your parents, who I believe are watching online, Weifeng Huang, and Curating YU. And so please, with your family there and your family and your wide community of friends here, let us all join in hands and make a toast to celebrate you and to continue to support you in your academic or your curatorial or your combined multi-approach career ahead. Many congratulations.
Dear Dr. Yu, let me also congratulate you on behalf of Maastricht University with your new degree. You did a great job today. Many thanks. So now I would like to invite the audience to already go in the direction of the Lion bookstore. It's Grote Gracht 63. And those who are members of the committee and the opposition should stay on just for a picture. So, but we will be joining you in a moment also for the reception. Thanks a lot.
Photographer, please stay.